¿Empieza a
Sí,
grabar
me
o
parece.
Ahora lo prendí.
Gracias.
Ahora lo prendí, no sé.
grabas tú
Perfecto.
entonces, Marcelo? O
No.
Bueno, no, espera.
para...
Ya.
Building coalitions.
Gracias, Ignacio, perdón.
Listo, bueno. Me parece que en atención de la hora, aunque somos pocos, había creo que 15 personas anotadas, pero me parece que, no sé cómo piensan ustedes para ir empezando.
Sí, arranquemos, yo creo, y esto va a quedar grabado, ¿no?
Claro, ok.
Entonces...
Entonces le damos, sí, dime.
Espera 2 minutos. Ya que
Ok,
tenemos 2 horas, no sé.
acá,
Espera,
David
acá viene
Reynolds.
más. Sí.
Good morning, David. How are you doing today?
Hello.
How are you?
Hi, Anna. I'm good, thanks.
¿Cómo estás?
Yeah. ¿Estás bien?
Qué bueno. Just out of curiosity, are you fluent in understanding spoken Spanish?
No.
No. Okay. We'll go back and forth. It's just that we
That's
were
fine.
not sure whether people were fluent in both or not. Some people are, some people are not. So we'll go back and forth just to know.
Sure, that's fine.
And we are going to be taping the session, just so you know, because we just started, and just to let you know. Bueno, quizás sí podemos ir empezando. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas, welcome. This is Liviana 2, el Congreso Liviana 2. El año pasado fue Liviana 1, con muchas sesiones y mucho interés internacional. Y después de esa buena experiencia, se decidió en la red de economías comunitarias hacer el segundo congreso. Out of the great experience of last year in Liviana, we decided that there was enough interest to hold another conference this year, which is called Liviana 2. And the meaning of the term in Spanish is interesting because it can mean something that is light in a way that is not a burden. So we took that name last year to mean an encounter between people who would be interested in sharing some time and space virtually because we couldn't do it face to face. Entonces, recuperando el sentido de Liviana, este año también, como seguimos en pandemia, hacemos las sesiones virtuales y la noción de Liviana nos trae este sentido de liviandad y de posibilidad. Cuando estén en la sesión, si pueden seguir las indicaciones que hay debajo, que dicen keep your microphone on mute unless you're speaking, o sea, tener los micrófonos apagados a no ser que quieran hablar. Decir cualquier cuestión que quieran decir en el chat. We can use the chat to interact as well. Y por sobre todo, tener un trato amable y amigable, que esto es muy interesante porque en el contexto latinoamericano, por lo menos en Argentina, muchas veces el tono, si bien es muy fuerte, igual es de respeto, pero son distintas formas. I was just saying that in Argentina, sometimes our tone, specifically if you're from Buenos Aires, may come out as being very strong or too strong, especially for people who are raised in different parts of the earth. But we don't mean that as in disrespect, but out of passion. So, but anyhow, the frame in all these sessions is to engage with kindness and respect. So with that, let's see if I can keep on going with my slides. What we are doing today, Marcelo and I, is presenting on a piece we worked on for a year or so, maybe more than a year and a half. Hace un año y medio que estamos trabajando con lo que vamos a presentar hoy, más o menos, Y es un trabajo conjunto que vinimos haciendo y que acabamos de enterarnos hace muy poquito que ya casi está por salir para publicación, so will be published soon. Yeah. And our main goal today is to walk you through some of the concepts we had to work through to put together a framework that would allow us to dig into these ideas of solidarity in practice and solidarity in difference. Entonces, lo que vamos a hacer es mostrarles un poquito el encuadre que tomamos, cómo pensamos estos conceptos de solidaridad organizacional en práctica y en diferencia, haciendo un ejercicio de descentramiento, decentering the concepts, the main concepts, such as organization, organizing, solidarity, and put them in juxtaposition with practice and difference. Nos interesa pensar entonces más profundamente cómo podemos hacer para pensar sobre qué cuenta como la organización o organizaciones o el acto de organizarse en América Latina, sobre todo poniendo ese concepto de organización en relación con los conceptos de práctica y diferencia y de solidaridad. Y lo que queremos remarcar es que para hacer este trabajo nos dimos una estrategia de tratar de encontrar puntos en común y también puntos en tensión de literatura escrita en distintos idiomas. So we used literature written in different languages, such as Spanish, English, Italian, Portuguese, to build up our framework. Because we have, sorry,
also Quechua and Aymara in some cases.
Right.
So.
Yeah, even though we cannot read those languages.
We can read them, yeah.
Right. We've used sources written by people who are fluent in those languages and bring their concepts and way of thinking for us in Spanish or English. So we got to those perspectives via these languages. Esto en sí mismo es uno de los puntos interesantes que queríamos traer para pensar y para poner a debate. We are interested in debating about this because interlinguistic and intercultural perspectives are hard to build. The same word may not mean the same thing in a different context, even in the same language. And more so when we're speaking about different languages and different geographies. So that's part of the aspects we'd like to discuss with you later. I'm not sure why I cannot move the slides. Okay. So I will be speaking about these points, which are why we're still using the concept of America Latina, even though this is a very controversial concept for some people and some of the organizations we've been working with. I will also be speaking about the methods we followed, and I will present a couple of issues regarding how we constructed our framework. Entonces, aquí ven en la diapositiva un poquito lo que yo voy a seguir como estructura en mi conversación, y Marcelo va a seguir esta estructura. Marcelo will pick up after I finish my presentation, my part, and he will be speaking more in depth about the cases we took as illustrative cases, que son casos de Bolivia y Argentina. We will be speaking about the emergent themes and we'll pose questions for debate. Entonces, para empezar, queremos situarnos en esta región que hemos, como decíamos, decidido llamar América Latina. We're keeping the use of the term Latin America and the Caribbean region. Pero situándonos en el aspecto de que, por supuesto, esta región, como otras regiones del globo, tienen una historia de genocidio y colonialismo y patriarcado. Entonces, es importante que cuando nos situamos para pensar sobre qué puede querer decir la solidaridad en diferencia y en práctica, tengamos noción de que cualquiera de esas construcciones organizativas que se dan en el presente están referenciadas a esta larga lucha contra situaciones de colonialismo. Acá hay dos conceptos que me interesa destacar. There are two concepts that I'd like to highlight here, which are neocolonialism and hibris del punto cero. Neocolonialism refers to the fact that even though we could think that colonial domination has ended as in legal terms, so to speak, it is still embedded in our territories and very much so. If you take a look at what's been happening in Chile recently, in Peru, in Brazil, in Bolivia, also in Argentina, in regards to the fights to access rights by different communities that have been for the longest time dominated, you will notice right away that these aspects of colonialism are still in place. En ese sentido, seguimos pensando que las estructuras de nuestros estados-nación están muy atravesadas por esta noción de neocolonialismo, es decir, una perspectiva colonial que se sigue sosteniendo en el tiempo y que persiste y está muy anclada en nuestros territorios. Voy a ligar estas cuestiones con lo que Santiago Castro Gómez denomina la hibris del punto cero. Y con ese concepto se refiere a esa situación que es muy característica de muchos lugares que han sufrido la dominación colonial, que es que quienes son habitantes nativos de esos lugares, precisamente por efecto de esa dominación material y subjetiva, suelen adoptar también el punto de vista colonial. Es decir, que ese aspecto es una tensión permanente. What I'm referring to is the concept of hibris of del punto cero by Santiago Castro Gómez. And he's pointed out that even though the native peoples of different places in the world, he has done research in Latin America, but his point may be used to think about different places in the world as well. So the peoples who inhabit those places also, by the processes of domination themselves, do tend to adopt this perspective of the dominant framework. So that's a tension that is still happening nowadays. So what I'm trying to paint for you is a very complex situation that traverse all the countries in Latin America, where this situation of neo-colonial perspectives are still in place. And that has been one of the very crucial points against which lots of peoples and coalitions have been built over time, not only in the present, but in the past, to precisely fight against that situation. So that's one of the key points here. I'm showing on the screen two people that have contributed their thinking to untangling these ideas of colonial thinking and neo-colonial thinking. On the left, you see the poet Aimé Césaire, and on the right, you see Silvia Rivera Cusicanti. And we bring these people to your attention because this is another point that in our research to work with these concepts we've been putting in focus, which is that our perspectives are being built in connection with African, Latin American people, with Aymara and Quechua people, with Mapuche people, with people from the northeast of Argentina, Wichi, for example. In other words, all these perspectives that are in the local context have been playing out in relationship with the other perspective that I had just explained about, which is this perspective of colonial and neo-colonial domination. So that is to say that the region we know as Latin America is a very complex territory where these forces are at play, and very intensely so. And one of the key points that these two authors that I'm showing on the screen brought to us to think about is the right to self-nominate yourself and to play with language. Language is a living force. La lengua es una fuerza viva, y a través de la lengua y la conceptualización hay muchas de las luchas que se dan en nuestros territorios que se hacen evidentes justamente en este derecho y esta posibilidad y esta tensión para autonominarnos y elegir los términos con los que queremos hablar. Entonces, a la derecha yo he puesto el término América Latina, pero abajo he puesto distintas nominaciones que ese mismo término ha tomado a lo largo del tiempo y según quién lo use. Es decir, para algunos pueblos el territorio es Abya-Yala, o son los Suyus, o es el Gualmapu, o es la América campesino-indígena, o la América negra, Black America, o South America, pero también Lusoamérica e Hispanoamérica han sido términos que se han usado para estas regiones que vienen más, como decíamos antes, de esta perspectiva colonial y neocolonial. Simplemente estoy mostrando que este territorio es complejo en su diversidad, en su variedad, y que entonces cuando nos enfocamos en el estudio de lo que puede estar ocurriendo hoy con respecto a la organización en diferencia y la solidaridad en diferencia, es importante tener en foco esta enorme diversidad y esta necesidad de traducciones entre distintas perspectivas. Voy a pasar un poquito rápido por esto, pero es para mostrarles unos mapas en donde se ven mapeados por otras personas. These are not our sources, we took them out of the sources that we are citing there. Son mapas que han construido otras personas, pero resultan visualmente interesantes para ver todo el movimiento que sigue habiendo en nuestros pueblos y en nuestras geografías cuando pensamos en distintas situaciones de estallido social y de lucha. Entonces, un poquito para terminar con esta parte que yo voy comentando en el aspecto con respecto al nombre de América Latina, tengamos en foco que América Latina es un término que estamos usando por ahora, simplemente porque
Hola, ¿siguen ahí? ¿Todos? Creo que se le colgó.
sí, Marcelo, se colgó Ana.
Ujú. Puedo continuar con mi parte. I can continue with my part, and then we'll have her back, and then she can finish off, perhaps. ¿Puede ser así? Hagamos así, ¿sí? ¿Sí me escuchan?
Sí, Marcelo, dale.
Bueno, ok. Que no sé cómo, a mí, yo todavía veo la presentación de Ana. Ok.
Puedes compartir tu pantalla
Sí,
si lo
sí, sí,
deseas.
sí. Ok. Ok. Hold on a second, I was in a... Ok, just to get a sense, para saber, ¿todos hablan inglés? ¿Todo entienden inglés? Does everybody speak English? Yes. I'm mostly going to focus in English here. In part, I decided to mostly focus in English because I think it's important for those in the global north, those in the Anglo-speaking world, which is the predominant center of the academy. We often forget, and I straddle both worlds. I was born in Argentina, but work and live and grew up in Canada. And so I kind of understand viscerally what it means to be in the South, but also be from the North. What often happens when we're from the North and or when we're Northern scholars, even if we're scholar activists with good intentions is we often forget that there is a lot of theorizing, knowledge building, knowledge making in the global South and in other languages. So one of the attempts of this project that fortunately will get published in a northern journal, in the journal Organization, which took a long time to do, specifically because of this interplay and this effacement of language and meaning in translation, what's lost in translation, so to speak. So we really struggled. It was probably one of the hardest projects to write about, one of the hardest papers I've had to write, I've collaborated on, because of trying to communicate these notions in English. So illustrative cases, I want to talk about our 2 illustrative cases and the emergent themes, and then remaining questions that we can use to open up discussion. So as Anna was saying, even the notion of Latin America, which we initially used probably unreflexively, was contested by especially one of the reviewers of the piece, hence our having to go back and really think through what we mean by Latin America and why differentiate this region. And can we use, often Latin America is used as examples of, alternative forms of organizing, alternative economies, other economies, community economies. But can we group, can we generalize this vast and diverse region? And the second notion that we got critiqued on is using a concept even of organization and solidarity to understand the processes of coming together in coalitions in Latin America, and in particular these 2 illustrative cases. So our paper very much tries to unpack these concepts and how they are still deployed and can be deployed, but in a way that's respective of local knowledge as well. And so the 2 illustrative case studies, I also can't move forward for some reason. Oh, there we go. There we go. So the 2 illustrative case studies were Bolivia's campesino-indígena groups, migrant groups meeting in El Alto, in the outskirts of La Paz. And for us, they showed self-organizing socio-political spaces, the way that socio-political spaces are self-organized by local groups and by autochthonous groups. And Argentina's empresas recuperadas showed us how groups can self-manage spaces of production. And we saw emergent themes across these, at the same time, diverse experiences as well. Can you see my notes, or can you see my PowerPoint presentation? Because I have notes up on my screen too.
The PowerPoint is very clear.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay,
Not
excellent.
the notes. I'm
Okay,
back.
good.
I'm sorry.
Okay, Anna, I'm just going into my part. Is that okay? And then we can return to you, or would you like to
Sí,
finish?
perfecto. No te preocupes. It's just that my connection is horrible.
Está bien. Okay, so let me start by just defining what we mean by solidarity, organizational solidarity in practice, and embedded in that is solidarity and difference. So we have to step back and we have to step back and say, well, what is solidarity? Why solidarity? This was a response to a special issue, by the way, and solidarity and difference in the journal Organization, which is why we immediately thought America Latina is a place for this, but then ran up against these conceptual lexiconic problems and problems in translation. One of them is solidarity. So solidarity is a European concept. It has its roots in Rousseau. It has its roots in Roman law, actually. And then it got conceptualized even further in the Enlightenment by Rousseau and then Durkheim. They all use this concept of solidarity. So it's a normative concept. But the use of the term solidarity in and through organizations is a more recent development in the literature. So Sally Schultz she's a philosopher, and she's done a really good job of synthesizing and summarizing and doing a genealogy of solidarity. And she found that in the philosophical literature, the Eurocentric philosophical literature, we can look at solidarity as a social, civic, and political domain. That is, there's social solidarity, civic solidarity, and political solidarity. I can't get into the social solidarity is the type of solidarity that Durkheim was writing about. Civic solidarity is a solidarity that Rousseau would write about, the social contract. Political solidarity is a much more complex form of solidarity. And this is the form of solidarity that we see emerging in Latin America, and in particular in the two cases that we're illustrating. Now, our two cases, so before I talk about that, solidarity and difference, the way that we define it is this: several contextually situated actions, as diverse as they might be, and as local as they may sound, and as micropolitical as they are, can be mutually supportive of each other when they are oriented towards ways of being and goals important for all involved, including challenging structures in which they participate for a more equitable way of living. We see this form of political solidarity resonating across America Latina. Why? Why do we see this common thread, let's call it? We don't want to generalize, but we want to show that there's a commonality. Because neoliberalism, in particular in recent decades, enfolded the region in a way that we can see commonalities across the region, and people responding to the worst effects of neoliberal enclosures in ways that are perhaps unique to the region south of the Rio Grande, for particular also histories of colonialism that we share amongst the pueblos de la región. So without generalizing and universalizing, this is the general theme and concept that we mobilized to understand these cases. So let me talk about the two illustrative cases. Before I do that, in these two cases in Bolivia and Argentina, the organizational solidarity in practice, I want to reiterate, is twofold for us and what we see across the region, but in these two illustrative cases in particular. That is, it's resistive and creative. It resists neoliberal enclosure and neocolonial enclosure and domination, but also is creative. And these experiments are both creative and resistance and resistive. In Bolivia, the experiences of organizational solidarity in practice that we have identified, and I'd be really interested to see what Laura has to say about this as she spent time there. In the past 4 or so decades, the experiences in Bolivia have emerged with an ongoing reality of neoliberal and neocolonial socioeconomic oppressions and creative responses to them by indigenous, campesino, and working class groups. These are transversal notions. They're transverse amongst the same groups and people, that they're indigenous, they're campesino, and they're working class, amongst other things as well. Self-organizing socio-political spaces in Bolivia. Drawing on secondary resources, so secondary sources, studies that have been done with indigenous campesino and that have been done in collaboration with indigenous campesino groups, in particular in El Alto. We see several practices that kind of unpack and help us understand this organizational solidarity in practice amongst groups in the context of Bolivia. One is the Ayllu. The Ayllu merging, and my apologies for my lack of proper pronunciation of indigenous concepts, but the Ayllu is merging with working class and regional practices. They come together in El Alto. This revived and reinvented coalitional relational solidarity in practice in Bolivia is particularly vibrant and has been for the past few decades in El Alto and La Paz, near La Paz. Between the mid-1980s to the early 2000s, massive migrations of peoples across Bolivia unfolded, where entire rural communities relocated from different areas of the country to El Alto. pushed by processes of dispossession and neoliberal rearrangements of the economy. They were brought together to allow out of economic circumstances and in extreme cases out of state and capitalist-led dispossession. So migrants from various parts of Bolivia would meet in a new urban setting and build a new city, so to speak, in the outskirts of Bolivia, rooted in practices of solidarity and collective world building. They brought notions of the Ayllu with them. The Ayllu are pre-Inca Andean, they have pre-Inca genealogy in history, and they're Andean governance models for organizing farming and production via intra and inter-family collaboration and collective labor. These groups practicing what Raúl Sibechi has called the communal system of El Auto. So that's his term for it, and he's borrowing from other sources as well, brought the Ayllu way of cultural and economic doing with them and merged them with council-based, directly democratic organs at the neighborhood level in very innovative ways, basically creating a parallel state, if you will, within but outside of the Bolivian state. Their own system of taxation, their own system of policymaking, their own system of inter-urban and inter-neighborhood exchange, economic exchange and social exchange and cultural exchange that sits outside of the Bolivian state, or despite, we can say, the Bolivian state in complex ways, in ways that include horizontal ways of organizing, council, decision-making structures, and the inclusion of old and young, women and men as well. So they've been reinventing the neighborhood in a pluriversal way, and a notion of collective organizing at a macro or macro level that simulates a state but isn't the state. It doesn't take on this hierarchical approach. It remains horizontal. The other concept that was that really is brought to light and encapsulates many of the ways of interaction and organizing, again, comes from indigenous notions, and this is the notion of the Chiiksi. And Rivera Cusicanqui has spent a lot of time looking at ways that the notion of Chiiksi has been revived in the long memory rooted in keeping present and alive Aymara and Quechua traditions of collective work and organizing within the Ayllu. The Chiiksi is the Aymara notion of the motley, right? That is, think of a motley cat, right? This Chiiksi is it's a hybridity. It's a coming together of many things into not a purebred anything, but a hybridity of actions, thoughts, experiences. So this is an indigenous notion of prefiguration that accounts for the past, the present, and the future at the same time, right? It doesn't separate the past. The future isn't better than the past and better than the present, but it's conceptualized together. And what she calls a notion of indigenous and provocatively indigenous modernity, again, identifying or bringing to bear a synchronicity, the notion of synchronicity that's been used across the region that we call Latin America. So an indigenous modernity, and she defines this as within this indigenous modernity, Chiiksi can emerge from the present in a spiral whose movement, and I'm quoting Rivera Cusicanqui, in a spiral whose movement is a continuous feedback from the past to the future in a principle of hope or anticipatory consciousness that both discerns and realizes decolonization at the same time. It realizes decolonization, discerns it, and moves beyond it, but it holds all of this together in and at the same time. It doesn't separate past, present, and future. So for Rivera Cusicanqui, this notion of the Chiiksi that we can see in places like El Alto, but in other social movements against the gas, for example, the gas and water wars in Bolivia, is a type of intergenerational solidarity. Not only solidarity in the same space and time, but across space and time. intergenerationally. Jumping forward a bit, Gutierrez Aguilar has drawn on the notion of Pachacuti to conceptualize this past, present, and future. Pachacuti is an ancestral Quechua term referring to the processes by which the order of things as it used to be is challenged, and new ways of understanding and collective doing emerge as well. And then finally, through his work in dispersive power, Raul Sibechi has looked at the ways of organizing in this communal system in El Alto, and has also drawn on the notion of long and short-term memory, long and short memory. This is the other thing that's embedded in Rivera Cusicanqui's Chiiksi, the notion of collective memory, of long and short-term memory. Sibechi also seizes on this to look and looks at the ways of organizing in El Alto in what he terms the Andean logic of reciprocity, a long memory in an Andean logic of reciprocity that very much is embedded in the Aiju. He particularly and evocatively focuses in on and spends time talking about the Plan de Puliga, or the flea plan of struggle. Again, a resistive and creative act and way of resisting neocolonial and neoliberal oppressions, but at the same time creating within it something else, prefiguratively, as we would say in Eurocentric notions. So there's organizational solidarity that emerges in the Plan de Puliga. What is this Plan de Puliga? It's how they organize to resist and also to disperse power, right? So the Plan de Puliga, the flea plan, it can also be called the Wairanki or the Waironki, I'm sorry, the beetle strategy, or the Sikiti, the red ant strategy, or the Tarakchi, the strangulating the city strategies. These are all words that are used to delineate, show, and mobilize how one should occupy a space, for example, to resist, but also to create, as this picture in this slide is trying to depict. These words in their original languages are also metaphors and speak about the very complex art of resisting, struggling, and inventing, creating. So in order to implement the flea plan, for example, one must be ready to block streets or roads at night to counter state repressions or other threatening acts from constituted power, but also be prepared to leave quickly, just like the flea does when it stings, in unison with other fleas, coordinating their actions simultaneously and throughout the whole body. More explicitly, these organizing structures are all guided by daily assemblies and are supported by many people taking turns in speaking and leading. It's almost like the fleas are coordinating in solidarity, right? If they were to coordinate in solidarity, they would resemble this type of inventive action. So that's Bolivia. And Argentina, probably much more familiar to many of us, also expresses notions of organizational practices, organizational solidarity in practice, but from different contexts and different perspectives, from a working class perspective. They emerge, the empresas recuperadas, or notions of autogestión, self-management, which the workers of the worker-recuperated enterprises, which I've written about in a book, Worker Self-Management in Argentina, which was released last year. It's probably the first academic book-length look at Argentina's empresas recuperadas, where I situate it with the broader political economy of Argentina and its struggles with neoliberalism, but also rooted in its long tradition of working class self-activity and activism, and rooted in a worldwide self-management and workers' control movement. It also draws from the many years of work that Ana and her group in Incluir have been doing with other groups of autogestión or self-managed groups in Argentina. So these emerged in particular with force at the turn of the millennium, with the collapse of the neoliberal model in Argentina, and what we can loosely term or broadly term as flexibilización laboral was one of the ways that these expressed at the level of the factory. That declawed decades-old labor and social security rights and the dignity of working people, and relegated more and more Argentines to the unemployed masses. In light of this, and in light of also fraudulent bankruptcies emerging, more and more workers would take over workplaces and convert them to cooperatives, and they would transition themselves from managed workers to managed employees to self-managed workers, and transformed enterprises that open up the shop to the community from private for-profit firms to true social enterprises with cooperative structures focused intimately and intently on community actions. So I'm going to close it off by just picking out, I'm not going to describe in detail the empresas recuperadas. There's a lot that's been written about them. And you can read my book or read the work that read some of my articles or the articles of Dario Acellini and Andre Ruggeri and others. Much great work has come out of Uruguay and Brazil also from autochthonous scholars around the empresas recuperadas. But what I want to just focus on and highlight are the major concepts that emerge. Recuperating a workplace is one of them. La recuperación, not the recovery, but the recuperation. What recuperation seizes on is taking back what once was one's, right? What once belonged to oneself and one's collective. Recuperation is also a medical term. It's also bringing back to health, returning to use that which was broken. All right, here I'm loosely citing dictionary definitions of recuperación. It's very much what is meant by recuperating a workplace. It has a socio-political intention to it. It's much more than recovery. It's recuperación. Collective memories are seized upon. That is, these workers don't just invent this out of the sky, but they're drawing on long traditions in Argentina of organizing on shop floors, union organizing, where workers stop work and come together and discuss the conditions of work, discuss the future collective agreements at a sector-wide level, cuerpos de delegados, asambleas. These are long traditions in most workplaces that is by legislation, workers have to be able to organize this way in Argentina. Also, the taking over the occupation of streets, the taking over the occupation of workplaces, the occupation of schools by students. There's a long tradition in Argentina of occupying spaces for political reasons and for socio-political reasons, organizing collectively in this way. The empresas recuperadas protagonists draw on this tradition. It emerges from microeconomic crises, micro crises resonating on shop floors, and also from the macro crisis of the neoliberal model. And these are transformative for organizations. Other concepts and notions that emerge from Argentina's empresas recuperadas are la fábrica abierta, trabajo sin patrón, compañerismo. If they touch one of us, they touch us all. Innovación social, recuperación, and finally, autogestión, a collective's self-determination of their labor and association. It's a word used often by the protagonists of the empresas recuperadas. These also resonate in Bolivia, but in different ways. And in the illustrative case in Bolivia that we relied on, but in different ways. There are other ways that the indigenous, campesino-indígenas groups from El Alto, for example, talk about autogestión. They might deploy indigenous notions, the ayu, but they might also use autogestión too. Again, this notion of synchronicity, this way of politicizing and reclaiming the concepts and words of the colonial masters into subversive ways, into new ways. Another concept that we didn't bring up in our presentation was emancipación de liberación. These have long traditions in the independence movements in Latin America, but also in the movements for autonomy of otherwise marginalized groups as well. So the four major concepts that emerge, let's call them threads, common threads that emerge for us that are illustrated in these illustrative case studies. And I want to emphasize that we use the term illustrative case studies. This is not generalizable to every case in Latin America, just like Latin America can't be generalizable to every place in the region known as Latin America. These are illustrative. They're suggestive of common threads, common notions, and common experiences based on loosely based ways of contesting and dealing with neocolonialism and contemporary form of neocolonialism, which is neoliberalism. So the common threads that have emerged for us through these illustrative cases that express, that bring to light what is meant by organizational solidarity in practice would be neoliberal contexts. They emerge out of common neoliberal contexts across the region. They draw from collective memory of those that have gone before, groups that are currently practicing solidarity in organizations, in organizational practices. And they enable autogestión or horizontalización, the horizontalization or the collective self-management of socio-political and productive spaces. And finally, they speak to coalitional possibilities of bringing in different groups with perhaps at times different needs and different desires into common practices and common directions in coalitions that could be temporary at times or more permanent at other times, or perhaps are both in different aspects and different notions and different struggles. So with that, we want to open it up to discussion for the last hour. I also, before I do this, before I pose let me pose these questions, and before I pose the questions that we can open up to discussion, I'd like to return to Ana to see if there's anything missed and then anything if Ana wants to say. But before that,
Gracias.
before that, these are things that to keep in mind. What does this organizational solidarity in practice look like in your place and in other places? What's in dispute in this notion? What is coalescing? What coalitions are forming? For what? For whom? For where? What are the things that are coalescing? What are the processes of subjectivation, transformation of subjectivity or conscientization, as Paulo Freire would call it? And what contradictions, importantly, are at work? So, Ana?
Sí, solamente voy a agregar algunas pocas cosas, hablando desde esta transparencia, so if you can leave it there, that would be great. Justamente parte de lo que yo quería exponer, que no pude porque se cayó mi conexión, era algunos puntos claves sobre nuestra metodología, que como Marcelo fue explicando a lo largo de su charla, una parte que es esa parte que se preocupó en nuestra metodología por identificar conceptos locales en uso por parte de las organizaciones que nos interesó tomar como casos y justamente revisar su capacidad descriptiva para los mismos participantes y su capacidad explicativa. So one of the methodological steps we took was to look into the concepts that the illustrative cases are using themselves to try and understand what they mean in that context and what are they used for, and why, as I said prior in my talk, it's important to take a perspective of the reclaiming of the voice in terms of the even native language itself, or the perspective that that word would carry in that language, which is not very easy to do, since unfortunately we cannot claim to be as plurilingual as we would like to. So that's one issue that I would like to very much bring forward for the audience. Me gustaría que si la audiencia tiene pensamientos sobre este aspecto, que fue uno de nuestros retos metodológicos, lo pudiéramos conversar. Si no se entendió bien esto que dije, después lo podemos volver a traer. If this was not that clear, we can re-explain it later, but I'm interested in knowing if the audience has any thinking to offer, any problems they have faced in their work when trying to understand the concepts that are built locally and put them into work with concepts that, say, in academic contexts we've been using and people from other geographies have been using to describe these sites. So that's one of the issues I wanted to bring forward, building on what Marcelo presented. The other issue that I was going to present in my talk was regarding the relationship between the community economies approach and the approaches we bring together with Marcelo. Nos interesa desarrollar y poner a la vista y quizás conversar con ustedes aquellas contribuciones que en nuestro trabajo vienen de las economías comunitarias y la diversidad económica, de la red y del instituto en el cual esta presentación se hace hoy, a la vez de otras tradiciones que tanto Marcelo como yo hemos venido trabajando. Por ejemplo, en mi caso, hace muchos años trabajo desde perspectivas que combinan la psicología social argentina con la educación popular, con la autogestión pedagógica. So these are big concepts that, at least in the framework we've been using in our team, are very key and important, and that we find useful to interrogate and work with the experiences we've been analyzing, and that maybe are used in the community economies context in a different way, but would like, again, to open up this dialogue between different perspectives. So I guess those would be the main 2 points, and I'm not going to go back and explain the whole piece of the methodology. We can explain it later if people are curious, but anyhow. And lo que sí me gustaría hacer es también mostrarles que en esta transparencia hay preguntas que son más bien para responderse necesitan de descripciones. These are questions that could be answered or need description to be answered. Could be answered descriptively, or need a description to be answered, which is one of the steps that community economies takes to which, for example, in our case in Argentina, we have been working out of the framework of ethnography. Ethnography as a framework starts by asking what's going on here, what are people's perspectives on what's going on, so on and so forth. And by description, and we may say thick description, you can start understanding what's at stake there. However, these descriptive questions also relate in our work with other questions. Estas preguntas que pueden empezar a contestarse de modo descriptivo se relacionan también con las otras preguntas que, si Marcelo podés pasar el otro slide, voy a comentar, que son preguntas que ya no están situadas en el aspecto descriptivo, sino que intentan poner en movimiento nuestras perspectivas de análisis e interpretación. Estas preguntas son: ¿cómo podemos conceptualizar? I'm going to be using Spanish to read out loud the questions, just to make sure that we are okay across languages. So since the questions are posed in English, I'm going to read them in Spanish. ¿Cómo podríamos conceptualizar estas formas de coaliciones, de juntarse, que en realidad son formas de la solidaridad, pero que se conjugan desde posiciones muy diferentes, muy diversas, muy distintas? That would be the first question. Esa sería la primera pregunta. La segunda pregunta es: ¿cuáles son las posibilidades y los desafíos de tomar una perspectiva que comience con un inventario, como llaman las economías comunitarias, que es, in the community economies framework, one of the first steps is to do an inventory by naming, listing, conceptualizing, and illustrating. And this is what we try to do with our cases, and we would like to hear whether in your work you use this perspective or not, si usan esta perspectiva de inventariar, y cuáles son las posibilidades que esa perspectiva les brinda y qué limitaciones podemos encontrar quizás o no. Bueno, la tercera pregunta es: ¿cómo podemos hacer para hablar junto con otros en vez de por otros? Y creo que muchos de los que estamos acá hacemos trabajo que podemos denominar de investigación-acción, o trabajo colaborativo, o trabajo cooperativo, y sin embargo en ese trabajo siempre nos encontramos con desafíos. There are challenges to not taking the word for, but speaking with, and we'd like to hear what those are. Y por último, y ligado con esta tercera pregunta, ¿cómo es que hacemos efectivamente esa disposición de acompañar, de being there with others, cómo lo hacemos en concreto, qué forma asume, porque eso también nosotros estamos pensando que es una forma de solidaridad en diferencia y nos gustaría poner en movimiento ese concepto también para mirar este último aspecto. So I guess that with that we can take out the slides and open the cameras and just talk. Gracias. If people would like to open their cameras so we can see each other. Gracias.
I'd just like one more thought that I have, that also the risk of naming. I teach these things at the graduate level in a course, Economic Democracy. Entonces enseño estos conceptos, algunos, bueno, muchos de ellos, y las experiencias de América Latina, de otras partes, como casos ilustrativos en un curso de economía democrática, o varios cursos, economía social y solidaria, y un estudiante me hizo la pregunta, pero ¿no es un riesgo nombrar alguno de estos grupos por identificación, porque se pueden identificar con el Estado? No, I said, is there a risk of naming these practices? If they're meant to be subversive, then what's our role as researchers? At the same time, we want to know how alternatives are built and how to make a better world, and what we can learn from indigenous communities and other groups. And at the same time, we risk exposing to hegemonic power, to constitute a power, these practices, right? So even naming the flee strategy, there's a risk to doing that for these groups potentially. So it's fraught, right? Potentially our interventions as well-meaning academics. This is my struggle personally, as well as I want to enthusiastically communicate these experiences and learn from them and try to build new realities, contribute as much as possible to that. But at the same time, then, tapping into some of the underground secrets that perhaps aren't meant to be exposed. I don't know, just some thoughts.
I have a question.
Ellison.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Marcelo, Ana, for your presentation. Very insightful, and congratulations on your publication as well. My question is linked to justamente the use of insects for these metaphors around community organizing and its relationship to community structures and frameworks used based from insect society, I guess. And actually, it reminds me of my time when I was able to visit Pueblo lands in Southwest. They also used the ants as a sacred entity, and there's a study that there are links to understanding and studying how these insects relate to each other and with their surroundings. So my question to you, Marcelo and Ana, is the role of hierarchy in these concepts, because from what I understand, insect society does have certain aspects of hierarchy in how they work and how they get things done. So I'm curious to understand, in your perception and in your literature review and in your studies from in the ground, what is the role of hierarchy when it comes to this relationship of community organizing, and in that context, its relationship with the world of the earth others, I guess, and their role of hierarchy? That would be my question. Thank you. Oh, and I have to, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have an answer, but
Yeah.
I have some thoughts. There's also without again, pushing back on the desire to idealize, right? Idealize these experiments. There's also hierarchy in certain practices of the Aju, if I understand correctly. Having done a bit of reading on how it was appropriated by the Inca and even in pre-Inca experiments, and how it's different in Ecuador than it is in current Ecuador and current Peru and current Bolivia. There's also it fit within a very hierarchical Inca system. So, and in the empresas recuperadas, although it's horizontal or horizontally organized workplaces, and they cooperate amongst themselves in many ways through social movement and with other social movements in horizontal ways. One of the pictures that I took in 2009 in front of the Hotel Bowen, that was social movements coming together to protect it from being expropriated. It shows this kind of intra-group solidarity or inter-group solidarity in organizations. Same time, you go into an empresa recuperada or a self-managed workplace, and there are leaders there. One of my cases is Unión Solidaria de Trabajadores, and it was led by Mario Barrios for years. And I remember I interviewed him and talked to him very many times, and he would get frustrated. But I want to leave. I don't want to be president forever. But they don't want to. Nobody wants to take up the mantle, and so he would have to, like, you're the next president. So I mean, all these tensions, right? And there's lots of stories like that. So I don't know. Besides me pointing out these experiences.
Quizás yendo a un punto más específico, o para donde yo también entendí que Alison estaba apuntando, que es la jerarquía entre seres vivos y esas metáforas. O sea, hay un aspecto que es lo que dice Marcelo, que es que efectivamente estos procesos están llenos de tensiones entre esta organización horizontal y estructuras que, como yo intenté explicar al principio, son de data muy larga y son estructuras de dominación. Entonces ahí hay algo que siempre está en tensión, y ese sería como un aspecto. Pero también entendí que Alison estaba preguntando acerca de la cosmovisión intrínseca o opuesta en la metáfora de los insectos, las relaciones entre ellos y otros seres vivos. No tengo una respuesta acabada, pero sí tengo un pensamiento acerca de que en la literatura, tanto de este tipo de experiencias como otro tipo de literatura, y ahora voy a decir cuál, a lo largo de la geografía de América Latina, aparece repetidas veces la figura de diferentes seres vivos, y por supuesto el reino animal es permanentemente tematizado. En esa tematización, en general, los insectos aparecen como aquellos seres muy pequeños con habilidades muy específicas que permiten hacer una especie de contraataque al orden dado. Entonces, ese es un punto que es común entre estos animales pequeños o insectos. Y cuando yo decía que aparecen en otra literatura, me refiero, por ejemplo, a todo el desarrollo de historia oral y también escrita en los caracoles zapatistas. Si ustedes se fijan, justamente el durito de la candona, que es un beetle, es un escarabajo, y toda la conceptualización que se hace desde ese lugar de enunciación, hay una persistente noción de que es un ser que atraviesa los tiempos, es un ser que tiene una coraza que le permite sobrevivir y a la vez puede meterse en lugares intersticiales, difíciles de acceder. Entonces ahí hay un tema que me parece sumamente interesante, Alison, y que me encantaría que puedas escribir sobre eso, que sería tomar algunas como visiones muy locales de distintos de los pueblos con los que estamos trabajando, para interrogarnos precisamente sobre las figuras que se usan como metáfora, por un lado, pero que a la vez en muchos de nuestros pueblos no son solamente metáforas, es decir, a veces el pensamiento occidental tiende a verlo solamente como una metáfora y no es así. Entonces eso es algo que me interesa poner de relieve y en todo caso debatir en profundidad. I'm sorry, David, maybe our much fluent speakers in English can do the translation for you, but I'm going to summarize very, very briefly. I was saying that the angle Marcelo took in his answer was maybe one angle we could take in regards to Alison's question, but there's a different angle that I thought she was also posing, which was about the specific meaning of the insects and small animals that are used by these experiences or are referred to in these experiences, and also the relationship amongst these different beings and whether or not there's a hierarchy and how is that hierarchy thought of or thought about and put to work. And my last point was about not thinking that these are only metaphors, but many of these ways of seeing the world and doing life take the relationship with animals and small insects and diverse beings in very distinct and different ways than, for example, we do in the big cities and people like me who have been very colonized for many years. So that's an interesting point to bring to debate. No sé, Alison, si algo de lo que dijimos te sirve como para seguir pensando o proponer alguna otra idea, porque it would be great to listen to.
Sí, gracias. Realmente era para explorar más que nada, porque yo igual no tengo más información que el tema de los insectos, pero era una reflexión nomás, una reacción a la coincidencia del uso de insectos como forma de metáforo para organización comunitaria. Así que eso, sí, gracias.
I will add just something very short and small, which is there's a writer in Argentina whose name was Horacio Quiroga, and he was a criollo, a porteño, person from Buenos Aires who went to live up north in Misiones, in La Selva. And a lot of his work was writing stories about animals and the ways they organized. And he did so because he was seeing that way of being in those places as related, as, you know, as a very intricate relationship between people, plants, animals, and he wanted to spell that out. And he wrote fiction, but his fiction is a theory about organization. So that would be a key point to take if we were to take that up to do that project. That would be something to look into. Marcelo, querías decir algo? Sorry, I spoke.
Sí, quería decir que también se encuentra en los grupos de las primeras naciones de Canadá, and you see these animal people coexistence in the cultures of the First Nations of Canada and the Inuit as well. So in the Pacific Northwest of North America, you have the totems, the famous totem poles, right? But these tell stories. They tell, they assert the history of territories, but they're about, it's much more than just what human being was present, but it's animals too. It's non-humans that tell these stories. And if you see them, there are human faces interspersed with fish, raven, bear. And then in the names that indigenous names most often have an animal in them. So silver bear, or I mean, I'm just making this up, but it's names like that, right? That tell of a history that's unlike a European telling of a history. My understanding from a very little reading that I've done on Aboriginal, on Australian Aboriginal and Maori ways of connecting to land and history is again in these stories. In North America, it's explicitly told around animal, non-animal, human person, right? Ways and that expresses themselves in names of people as well. And in Australia, it's things like in songs and in stories of why one group of people is in one part of the land and not in another part, and why another part, some other person from another part of Australia wouldn't think of taking over another part of the land, which was, from my understanding, why it was such a mystery to the original, right, with the first encounters, why these people from overseas would want to take over their land when they didn't know the story of the land.
Quizás aprovechando que no somos tantos, sería una buena idea ir alrededor del screen. If people, I was saying that taking advantage that we're not very many people here, maybe we can do a round of whatever resonates with you or whatever you'd like to put up to debate or agree, disagree with whatever we brought for you to think with. Estaría bueno si pudiéramos hacer una ronda. So, quien quiera tomar la palabra, just go ahead.
Can I? Bueno, first of all, just say that Alison just need to took off because we had another commitment. So my apologies in her behalf. But she'll be back in a few minutes, she says. But anyhow, thank you very much, Ana, Marcelo. Really impressive presentation. And basically, Ana, your despliegue de idiomático, yo creo que es un poder en madre, en práctica, en directo. Así que muchas gracias. I'm not that good in doing, you know, that automatic translation, so I'll just keep going in English.
O puede decir en español también.
O en
I
español.
can support
Bueno.
you to go back and forth, or Marcelo, or whomever, and David can also start learning some Spanish as well.
Yeah, no, I'll practice my English.
Dale,
Why not?
como quieras.
So, no, just say and tell everyone that basically you already, Ana and Marcelo, know, but we've been working through the CERN LA regional in some issues that crosscut with what you've been working from, you know, previous cycle and you know, a longer this project that you just presented. And well, congratulations for your publication of this. And in particular, the issue of the difference and solidarity, or as we put it this year, articulaciones, digamos, comunitarias. It seems like a very complex, for me at least, is so basically, let me go back to sort of a more personal situation, personal and political. We are, Alison and I are partners and live together here in Villarrica, which is a small city in the heart of the historical Mapuche territory. There's permanent conflict, especially around forestry plantations and in stolen land, basically. So the current government, el gobierno de turno, took the military to the streets a few weeks ago under state of emergency to control the arsons in the region. And yesterday, several people were shot, baleados, and 2 of them dead by the military after 30 years of, you know, non-military direct, violence in this country. So anyway, my question is, and as you know, we work, Alison and I work for now 8 years with Mapuche communities in supporting self-management processes. And this, of course, is very difficult for us and for our projection over time, because I mean, we don't know yet, but we are also with this constituent process, the new constitution process, that, so everything is quite complicated for us personally and for the country politically, and this issue of alliances and articulations through difference, right? We are not Mapuche. We don't want to become Mapuche. We never pretend so. But we do need to find ways to build stronger coalitions if we are going to, do something about anything. And it brings me to some of the discussions of the back to the CERN LA cycle, what Rothman was posing. We were hearing the sessions these few days because we are also preparing a presentation for next week in Libya in this conference about linking with the other as other in a reciprocal way, and yeah, so basically it's basically a thought, but maybe a question if you want to go into it. Is basically this idea of, so you have this solidarity around this broad sort of class-based movements, but you also had this need to come together with the other as other in an ethical reciprocal relationship around this common vínculo, basically. If I'm trying to understand what Joaquin Rodman says, but basically that's what we've been discussing with Alison with regards to our work with the Mapuche. I mean, how can we create a common vínculo? How you say, I don't know how you say vínculo in
relationship or link,
not
or
link.
tie.
There's not a translation, immediate translation. So
yes, that's true.
a human, how do you create a human link in common, which is the thing you have in common, but from this recognition of difference?
Sí,
anyway, I think it's a reflection more than a question, but Ana, please, yeah, thank you very much for the
voy a
the time.
puntualizar dos cositas y quizás después también los demás puedan hacerlo, maybe other people or Marcelo or whomever wants to speak too, just because I know Joaquin's work, because he's part of our team, and just to bring that into our discussion. Parte de lo que nosotros hemos venido pensando, como tú dices, es esta relación solidaria en diferencia que implica el reconocimiento de lo que empezamos a denominar la otredad radical, the radical otherness. And by that, we mean that there is a recognition of existential differences that are at the same time individual and cultural. And this is a bit complex, but hang in there. Porque lo que también estamos viendo es que cuando decimos el otro radical, solamente, por ejemplo, a blancos y mapuches, o a personas rurales y personas urbanas, porque esos son como grandes categorías o grandes grupos culturales. Sin embargo, dentro de esas realidades hay distintos posicionamientos subjetivos. Para eso nosotros estamos usando justamente también la noción de procesos de subjetivación, es decir, no hablamos de un sujeto o un individuo, sino de procesos de subjetivación que se van realizando en esos entramados complejos que se dan en los grupos. Vinculado a esto, pero diferente, viene un aspecto que Joaquín y sobre todo yo trabajamos en nuestro equipo ligado a aportes de la psicología social, que es la teoría de grupos. La teoría de grupos, originalmente en Argentina, fue a term coined by Enrique Pichon-Rivière, grupos operativos. Entonces, en ese sentido, lo que nosotros estamos viendo es que esa conceptualización de Enrique Pichon-Rivière nos permite comprender la dinámica que ocurre ahí sin esencializar, es decir, sin decir los mapuches son todos mapuches, por tomar tu ejemplo, y Alison Ignacio son criollos de la ciudad, ¿me entiendes? Sino ver en la dinámica misma de esa situación cuáles son los posicionamientos que se van asumiendo. Por eso sí, ese aspecto lo voy a ligar a lo que Marcelo y yo traíamos, que es la cuestión de la solidaridad en práctica. Porque the concept of solidarity and difference in our piece is related and intrinsically linked with solidarity in practice / practice of solidarity, meaning it is in the actual doing that you find yourself coalescing with, or not coalescing with, maybe fighting against. However, that's also where the local concepts are very useful, again, because, for example, taking your example, if we think about the community in which you're with, the local people do have terms for naming what they do, the relationships they establish. You've been talking about this in the sessions we met. It's a vocabulary that it's their own and that you may take up for the purpose of coalescing with them, but that you yourself may not use to describe your process. Or maybe you will if you want to take it up because it allows you to do an insight in your own process. Are you following me? It's a bit complex what I'm trying to say, but I'm trying to put together all the different points that we've jotted out. So I think one of the very important lessons, at least for me, in doing this work with Marcelo, was to take a very close look to this notion of practice. What do we mean by solidarity in practice? And I'm very curious to on this because I have tons of examples in the work I do with the cooperatives or with groups who are not per se cooperative of workers, but they're groups that get together for autogestión, you know, and I'd be curious to know whether people are finding this or they think that what we're saying is pure blah, blah, blah.
Can I follow, please?
Sí, por supuesto. Sí, claro.
So, this the radical difference. So of course for us it's not a problem to be in solidarity with the Mapuche. That's not the problem. The problem is how we create or put ourselves in a position where that can be reciprocal. So how we are not the Wincas, right? The colonizers, because you cannot reciprocally establish a common link with the colonizer.
Pero ahí es donde yo te digo que lo que hacen ustedes en práctica es lo que define.
Right.
De otra
Entonces,
manera,
la práctica lo que define.
O sea, lo que
Pero
yo te
define
estoy diciendo es que de otra manera las comunidades no hubieran trabajado contigo por 8 años.
Por supuesto, pero esa práctica, of course, but that practice has to be, as if I understand you, has to be narrated or put into discourse in such a way that this otherness becomes recognizable and constructive and not, o sea, even if conflictive, even, right? that
in
basically
our work, in our work, we used to use like a tripartite matrix, which we called, and we still use, prácticas, discursos, sentidos, meaning it's what you do, but also how you speak about what you do, and the ways you communicate about what you do, and the meaning that comes out of that practice and communication, even intention, like you're saying. Sometimes it's not that everything is happy and easy. Sí hay un aspecto de lo que tú dices que trae la teoría de Enrique Pichon Rivière, que es el aspecto de poner, de verbalizar, es decir, de explicitar. La teoría que él fue construyendo, uno de sus puntos iniciales fue tratar de comprender cómo en los grupos se dan situaciones que muchas veces quedan ocultas, y que ese estar oculto no permite una mayor horizontalización, como estás diciendo tú ahora. Él no habló de horizontalización, yo estoy usando esa palabra porque la usamos ahora, pero entonces, en su perspectiva, lo que él trató de brindar fueron herramientas que después sistematizó en un corpus muy detallado, tanto teórico como metodológico, herramientas de trabajo concreto en la práctica, para que cuando estás interactuando en grupo, esa corriente que a veces queda ocluida, oculta, y que puede empujar en sentidos que quizás no queremos, pueda, como dices tú, verbalizarse o ponerse explícitamente. Sin embargo, como digo, su trabajo en realidad empezó como un trabajo clínico desde la psicología, pero después fue haciendo trabajo en muchos otros ámbitos, escuelas, universidades, etcétera. Bueno.
Bien, muchas gracias, Ana. Muy interesante, la verdad que da para... Me tú.
No, aquí, perdón, lo último que digo es que sí es interesante tratar de recuperar aquellos teóricos y teóricas de nuestros países que también traen una perspectiva de muy larga data. There's a whole, there lots of people who've been thinking about these issues in our countries that maybe because they've written in Spanish, they're not known by Anglo speakers, and that's interesting to me. It's always interesting that that quite doesn't happen, pero no importa, seguimos pensando.
That's how, Ana, cuando no estabas así empecé mi parte de la presentación, que una de las cosas que estamos tratando de, I'll say it in English because it's important for the Anglo academics to hear this, and that's that there's a vast amount. I know we know this, but it's hard to penetrate this literature because of linguistic barriers, but there's a vast amount of theory, autochthonous theory around the world in different places that we're studying. And I have, my work is, I could critique it for also bringing in European concepts to understand, you know, what's happening in a neighborhood in Buenos Aires or in Córdoba or Bolivia or this or that. But there are, you know, local knowledges and traditions and theories and that are rich with insights that somehow we have to drill down into. And when we go in, and this is the challenge, right? When you go in and you're a northern scholar going to study a southern situation, or from another country going into, or another region, another space, going into a new space or a space that you're not originally from, you know, how do you articulate the things that you're seeing in ways that could make sense to others? There's a translation issue. Last year we had a really excellent presentation from a colleague of ours from Barcelona. What was her name again, Ana? And she talked about translation.
Sí, Antonia Caselas. Hay otra sesión en Liviana with her.
Yeah, she's in Liviana, I saw that. Brilliant. And the challenges of translation. And what we're doing is also, a translation issue. what Anna and I set out to do is ultimately a translation. We're trying to communicate things that we're seeing that are commonalities that could inform other ways of looking at the world and understanding the world, but with concepts that are not, you know, autochthonous to us, right? So anyway, some of the challenges, but that
Could we go around to hear people who didn't have a chance to speak as of yet? And just a funny thought came to my mind that when we say Anglo academics here, we should ask people whether they nominate themselves Anglo academics, because maybe they don't. I'm not pointing to anybody here. I'm not. Oh no, I know you're not.
But being transacting in that heavily in that sphere, I'm blaming myself too. I am part of that, and part of that kind of, you know, space. So it's a self-critique as much as anything. But I'm interested to find out about your work, Laura, in Bolivia.
Yeah, I was about to say that maybe I should say something before I have to leave, because I have some care responsibilities that are taking me elsewhere soon. Yeah, well, first of all, it was really interesting what you presented, and it raised a lot of thoughts that I have and I should be thinking still in my own work. So I've been doing my research in Cochabamba in Bolivia, which is quite a different environment from the La Paz, El Alto region. And I've been working with groups in mostly the urban or peri-urban environments. And they're in enterprises or like local small solidarity economy enterprises. And their kind of take on these like organizational solidarity issues and conceptual issues is quite different from many other things that are usually brought up from Bolivia in these contexts. Because, well, it could also be because of my northern, western, white, etc. bias that is obviously present in my research, but mostly the conceptual framework and the practical conceptual framework that the people I've been working with are using is not related really with the indigenous concepts, for example. It is partly because of the Morales administration kind of taking over concepts like buen vivir, that the people in the grassroots don't really want to use those concepts anymore, and that they've wanted to nominate themselves through something else, like, and trying to link to other global issues as well, like solidarity economy or what is it, the agroecology or something like this. There's like practical indigenous knowledge used, of course, all the time in farming and cultivation of plants and things like that, but the bigger like conceptual issues is interesting that they've kind of abandoned the indigenous inheritance. This is also because like the groups I've been working with are really diverse. There are people belonging to indigenous groups, but there are also European migrants that have come like quite recently. So there's a mix of people who are trying to kind of navigate through different knowledge backgrounds and different practical knowledge and come together as an organization and finding a way to organize themselves. And your question that you posed in the last slides about how to speak with rather than for others, I wanted to say that I'm really struggling with that now because I'm stuck in Finland because of COVID and because of my care responsibilities and family situation at the moment, is that I would really, really want to go back to Bolivia and like discuss in depth about all these issues that now I am still lacking information about. Coming up through the whole process of doing research and like being here thinking with myself.
Laura, did you do interviews?
I've done ethnography and interviews.
Oh, yeah.
I've spent like altogether like around 9 months in Cochabamba.
Yes. Yeah, it sounds similar to my conundrum. When I went to Argentina, I spent months, years more there. And then I went back to Canada and wrote. And then I was faced with this. I have these interviews, transcripts, stories, memories, notes. Now I'm supposed to make something of this.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I want to have a conversation, and I understand your conundrum. It's yeah.
Yeah, I was supposed to go to Bolivia earlier this year with my whole family, but I wasn't able to, and now the situation has changed with my family, so I won't be able to go with the whole group anymore. So I'll see what happens, but like trying to organize things from the distance and like do things online with people I don't share a language with everyone, because some of them only speak indigenous languages.
Yeah, it'd be good if you're interested. Maybe this is where the international network could be of help, because I think that maybe you would have to think about this, but if you wanted, you could post out looking for people who are interested and are somewhere else, and because I think that's the power of this network. Esta es una red muy solidaria en ese sentido, y cuando la gente sabe que otras personas están con dificultades, que cualquiera sea la dificultad, pueden colaborar. So that would be something to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, well, luckily I have a good contact with them, but like there's been change among the people who are there, like in key positions and stuff. So yeah, but it's a thing to keep in mind. But thanks for this session.
Yes.
On my part.
I was going to say that, in the interest of time, because I think Laura has to go, and a couple of people already went, so maybe we can pass the word to Florencia and David before we leave, just to make sure that people spoke and we heard people.
Bueno, sí que me intervengo. Bueno, primero gracias por las presentaciones y muy contenta de estar acá. Yo me sumé hace poco a la red, así que estoy entrando un poco en tema, algunas discusiones que sé que tienen continuidad, digamos, en conversaciones previas. Me gustó mucho la presentación y creo que algo ligado a las reflexiones que se estuvieron dando ahora en esta última parte, que tienen bastante que ver como con lo metodológico, con el vínculo, con el adentro del afuera, en relación a las personas con las que hacemos algún tipo de investigación, acompañamiento, activismo. Me pareció que está bueno ligar eso, ¿no? Y pensarlo en conjunto con esto que traía la presentación de ustedes acerca de las categorías y el uso práctico de las categorías, porque suele ocurrir, ¿no? Que todas estas cuestiones, digamos, categorías que describen cuestiones vinculadas a procesos organizativos, que ligados con los procesos organizativos de la economía comunitaria, o a veces llamamos colectivos, o a veces llamamos de distintas maneras, pero que nos pueden referir a procesos que tienen puntos en común, pero a la vez su historia, su tradición, ¿no? En los contextos, y ahí como que entran en juego, me parece, en la presentación de ustedes, varias cuestiones. Por un lado, las historias locales, ¿no? O sea, como qué significa solidaridad en Bolivia y qué puede significar en Argentina en cada caso, pero también ligado a esto de el vínculo de, bueno, estoy ahí, pero estoy afuera como investigador, o sea, no estoy siempre, es un adentro-afuera siempre dinámico, no va a ser de identidad, ¿no? Cómo abordar esos procesos, no hablando por los otros, como decía Ana, lo traía al final, también restituyendo la conceptualización que están encarando desde la práctica esas organizaciones o comunidades, y también cuidando de no, o sea, posar como presupuestos normativos, ¿no? Porque son categorías que tienen también una carga a veces moral, ¿no? Entonces como que creo que la presentación de ustedes nos abría pistas para seguir en esa línea, en esta dirección de, bueno, no estar siempre pensando en armonía, en igualdad, sino también en diferencias, tensiones, en hacernos cargo de que emergen estas disputas o estas incomodidades, podríamos llamar también, ¿no? Como son en algunos casos incomodidades o pueden transformarse en, y mejor, bueno, hacernos cargo, agarrar el guante de esas cuestiones, y sin por eso también reconocer el compromiso, ¿no? O sea, como que está en los vínculos, también pensar desde ahí. Esa es una reflexión que me disparó, pero además es desordenada tal vez, y un poco solo a nivel de poder compartir algo de lo que me llevo, y de lo que llegué a captar en el proceso. Pero bueno, muchas gracias y contenta de estar.
Gracias. David, would you like to take up your turn?
Sí, hola a todos. Perdón por mi muy mal español. I'm speaking from Australia, and I'm from New Zealand, and I agree with what Marcelo said. So well done on that. I really enjoyed hearing, especially about time in the presentations. The conceptualizations of time, and it's part of the struggle, but also two of the questions, Marcelo, at the end of your presentation. One was about processes, and one about coalescing, which are, both how long they take, or how intense the activity over time is really important with those. So if I had a question, it would be to hear more about that. Thank you. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, thanks, David. One of the things that the work of the processes, understanding the processes of groups, especially of some of the groups that we've been looking at and we've been interested in, Indigenous groups, Indigenous communities. I'm sure Ignacio has experience in this, and Allison, is that they don't work in academic times. That it doesn't fit into neat and, oh, I have a year and a half to do this research because my funding runs out. Decisions are made as decisions are made, and they can take time. It's different concepts of time, different concepts of accomplishing something and not accomplishing something. And it really doesn't fit well into academic times of publications and that. So, and so it should be. And so we have to learn to adapt rather than the other way around. I don't know, but this is even structuring a paper linearly, introduction, methodology, conclusion, findings, discussion, conclusion. I mean, even that is artificial. It's an artifice. And how can we tell these stories? How can we tell these stories in ways that are just as intellectually rigorous in other modalities and other ways of saying and speaking? I think these are, people like Rivera Cusicanqui and others that we've been reading and very much have been able to, in one way or another, bridge some of these ways of knowing indigenous ways of knowing with European ways of knowing. I mean, she herself is European indigenous. She herself is a hybridity. So it's interesting. These are some of the challenges that Anna and I had. And then responding to the reviewers was really interesting. How some of the reviewers were sensitive to this and some of the reviewers, I don't know, it was just, this is the things that were in tension, right? Some thoughts that I had, and it has to do with space-time differences between European notions of space-time linearity and non-European ways of understanding linearity in space-time.
Yeah,
Marcelo?
sí, dale.
Que yo no sé si entendemos, si Florencia entiende inglés, porque si no, para que quizás pueda traducir.
Florencia, ¿en
Un
inglés?
poquito.
Sí, ahí me estaban preguntando, sí, entiendo, algunas cosas se me pierden, pero la línea general la vengo siguiendo, así que muchas gracias por
Yo
la
estaba en el
respuesta.
chat por
bueno,
privado
perdón.
con Florencia y con David. I was in the chat in private
Sí,
with
sí.
David and Florencia, just trying to support language across Spanish and English.
Okay.
Lo que iba a decir quizás, sorry, go ahead.
No, just something, algo que yo aprendí es cómo, en mi práctica, lo que yo aprendo en mi práctica como docente, es cómo proponer, hay estudiantes que no se define que uno aprendió algo porque uno puede al final de un curso escribir un paper de 30 páginas. Hay otras modalidades, otras maneras de expresar investigación, lo que yo aprendí. There are other ways of this. Entonces, en mi curso, increasingly my courses, I'm experimenting with new ways of delivering knowledge and of reporting back on knowledge. So, entonces, en mis cursos estoy experimentando con diferentes maneras de, por ejemplo, algunas personas son más visuales o audio. Entonces, bueno, podcast o un website puede ser tanto intelectual y riguroso como un paper lineal tradicional de, no sé, estas son las cosas que me hacen mi trabajo complejo, pero a la vez rico también, en el sentido que pensar en nuevas maneras de expresarse, que son cosas que estoy aprendiendo de mis colegas indígenas también, que trabajan conmigo en la academia, pero que me han enseñado diferentes maneras que ellos enseñan y ellos hacen, ellos comparten enseñanzas y sabiduría.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Sí. Justamente yo quería traer un ejemplo de una de las formas que uso cuando enseño en la universidad. When I teach at the university, this is an undergrad course. And sometimes I use blogs. I mean, we have our, like, the aula virtual, the virtual classroom that they have to log into because it's university mandated. But we also craft other sites or places where we share information with the students. And this is one of those blogs from 2018. And what is something that I wanted to show you is that here to the left, if you see this picture, that's a picture I took in one of the exams they had to take in our class, which was to present a portfolio they had put together and bring it and speak about it and with other people about their work. So we started that day, that evaluation day, with putting all the portfolios around in a circle and asking people to go and take a look at them. Pusimos todas las producciones en una rueda y les pedimos a los estudiantes que fueran mirando y se fueran conectando, y después hicimos todo un ejercicio de evaluación. En el medio está una pintura que yo hice durante ese curso, a lo largo de las semanas del curso. This is a painting I painted during that course when I gave it. where I took a sentence out of Rivera Cusicanqui, precisely, which is Proceso de creación del mundo, el mundo al derecho y derecho al mundo, meaning we all have right to the world. The right to the world, to living in this world, is for all of us. That is sort of the meaning. And so I took out her sentence and worked on a piece. This is almost the final piece. And what you just saw was the boceto, the first, I can't recall the word for boceto in English. But this is another piece I'm clicking on by the girlfriend of one of the students. So the student said, I cannot draw, but I'm going to ask my girlfriend. Entonces, como él decía, no puedo dibujar, le pidió a su novia que dibuje para su portfolio. Y todo esto nosotros lo consideramos parte de su producción intelectual. Insistimos mucho en eso. Y acá les quería mostrar también que está en uno de los libros que usamos para el trabajo con modelo, que es de Rivera Cusicanqui. Ella tiene un glossary. Y her glossary está compuesto de palabras en inglés, castellano, quechua y aymara, en este caso. So she did a very precise work in trying to put together like a range of concepts that are useful for her work, that she says they come out in different shapes and forms and languages. So stressing that it's, you know, being caught in the binary opposition of the colonial language and the indigenous language, she says it's not helpful, doesn't help because we're all, in a way, you know, like Marcelo said, chichi, el concepto de chichi, modded, or you know, un concepto gris, mezclado, entremezclado. That's what she's up for. So anyhow, I just thought it was interesting that I could share this with you, and you could have a peek at that. So me parece que ya estamos en hora para cerrar. Thank you very, very, very much. Marcelo, no sé si quieres decir las últimas palabras in closing. I pass it on to you. I'm going to try and put down my screen. Maybe. Yeah. Meanwhile.
No, I thank you for sharing this space and this time with us. It was exciting to be able to share with you some of these ideas and ways of writing and ways of collaborating, which is a pleasure really to work with Ana. And we've established just a way of working that's very, very good. I really appreciate the times that we spend together, both asynchronously and synchronously, and virtually. And hopefully after the pandemic, we'll be able to spend time together in the same space soon. So, but thank you for sharing
David,
this. Yeah.
David, you should hang out with us in the Latin American regional.
Yes. And and hoping to come back in a more active way to the regional in the next cycle. I'm very excited. This year was very complicated. both from where we're living right now. I'm currently in Costa Rica. I'm supposed to be in Canada, but here we are, and other complexities. So, but things will settle soon. So just thank you. Gracias.
Gracias, and probably will be sending an email out to people who participated and who signed up but maybe couldn't make it, just to, you know, if you had more thoughts or people who couldn't make it would want to watch the session and then share ideas, I think that'd be great. So we can do that. Bueno, okay. Gracias.
Gracias.
I'm off to the university because we're back to the university. So I'm closing here. And I'm,
bueno.
Chao, chao, gracias.
Chao,
Great.
chao.
Muchas gracias.
Bye, gracias.
Chao, bye.